Welcome everyone. Again, I'm gonna reiterate that feel free to introduce yourself, take a moment, introduce yourself in the chat as you join our webinar. And now you will be hearing from Sarita Hanley. She's one of our founding board members, former board chair, and founder and co-chair of tonight's event. So I will let you run the video, please.
Welcome, friends, to our 5th annual colloquium and our first ever virtual event. We're most grateful you have joined us tonight to Building One Community, the Center for Immigrant Opportunity. Only a few of us are here present tonight in this beautiful venue at the Stanford Yacht Club, where we have traditionally held our fall event. Unfortunately, we cannot be together since COVID-19 is still lingering in our communities. Tonight's presentation is a bit of a hybrid, but mostly it's a live event with an outstanding guest speaker, followed by a live Q&A. Please do send your questions tonight and place them in the Q&A box, which you will find on your Zoom screen. Tonight's topic is on DACA will prove to be enriching and substantive. You will be fully engaged with the conversation of our guest speaker, Roberto Gonzalez, a Harvard School education professor and author of Life in Limbo. Before we begin our colloquium tonight, I have the distinct honor of introducing to you our new executive director, Anca Badurina. Anca first came to our Immigrant Center on a tour with our founding executive director, Catalina Horak. Anca was immediately engaged in our mission, where she began working 5 years ago. We are incredibly fortunate and most grateful to have as our next executive director a person of such impressive talent, leading Building One Community into its next decade. She will continue our mission of successfully engaging and integrating the lives of immigrants and their families in our communities. And now you will meet Anca Badurina.
Apologies for the delay in sound. The reason why we wanted to have the video is because this year every year this event is usually held at the Stanford Yacht Club, and we couldn't do it because of the situation we find ourselves in with this pandemic. So we decided that it was great to have Sarita there and remind us of where we are. So wanted to say thank you again for such a nice introduction, Sarita. And good evening, everyone, and welcome again. It's a pleasure to have so many of you here tonight. I am Anca Badurina, and I am the Executive Director of Building One Community. I've been with our organization for nearly 6 years now, and I came into my current role as EG over the summer. It is my pleasure to present this evening's program to you. Like I said, we are thrilled to have already over 100 people, and I know that over 230 actually sign up for these webinars. So I'm super excited for this evening. A few announcements before we actually get started is that our webinar will be recorded tonight, and I'm going to share my screen now. And I wanted to say that if you have questions, please use the chat, the icon of the Q&A below. And I'm having a bit of issue here trying to. There we go. So please feel free to put your questions there in the chat, please. So many of you know that our mission, B1C mission, is actually to advance the integration of immigrants and their families. And just to provide a bit of perspective, about 14% of Connecticut's populations are actually immigrants. When it comes to Fairfield County, that number raises to 22%. And for cities like Stanford, but also Bridgeport, Norwalk, Danbury, that number actually raises. For Stanford in particular, 35% of our residents are actually foreign born. So in our everyday work at B1C, we strive to make Stanford a welcoming place for all. Our goal is to bring together immigrant, refugees, and long-term time residents to build strong connections and to achieve collective prosperity. So over the last 9 years, we have provided a myriad of programs that, as you can see in this slide, educate, employ, empower, and engage the low-income immigrants from greater Stanford area with the community at large. So these are our 4 pillars around which our strategic program is organized. And in the following slides, I will walk you through what each of them what kind of program has in each of these pillars. In the Educate or adult education program, we have English classes, but also citizenship classes. And this was prior to the pandemic. Our center has always been a very lively and vibrant place. And this was one of those conversation classes on a Saturday. When the pandemic hit, we realized that we needed to keep on working with our participants. And this is an online class on citizenship. And Barbara, I know you're here today. I said hi before, so I promise you were, I was going to show you in one of my pictures. So here you are. Thank you. As soon as we were able to reopen the center, and doing so safely, one of the things that we realized is that not everybody was able to join our English classes, particularly the lower level of educations that also tend to be those with lower level of income and so on, did not have either the smart devices or the internet connectivity to do so. So when we have reopened our classes with very, very small groups, those were the folks that we brought in first. In the second pillar, and the employee one, is our workforce development program that has 2 legs, the skills development program and the hiring side. This picture is actually at the beginning of this year in one of our home health aid classes that we run in partnership with Norwalk Community College. And we just had opened our satellite office in partnership with AmeriCares at the AmeriCares Wellness Center in the east part of town. So our 3 core program tracks is the home health aid program, again, with Norwalk Community College, our culinary track that we run with New Covenant Center that I know we have folks from this partner tonight here. And the 3rd program track is on construction and landscaping. And this is a picture of a 30-hour OSHA training also at the beginning of the year. So we also move again into an online mode, and this is an example of an HHA class via Zoom. Eventually, when we were again able to bring the center back to life, we brought those participants that were not able to connect either again because of internet issues or possibly overcrowding conditions at home, and were not able to have a proper learning environment, if you will. The other side of the employee pillar is actually the hiring side that connects skills development program graduates with job opportunities, as well as the day laborers that are part of our center as well. And in this picture, you can see prior again to the pandemic, the Stanford Police Department addressing our day workers. This particular segment of the population have been perhaps one of those hit the hardest, in partly because of the overcrowding conditions in which they live, partly because of how they were working and so on. Many of them live 10 to 12 folks in the same room, and when we were telling everyone isolation for this population is much harder. So they were the ones contracting the virus the most and fairly quickly. So B1C, as many of you know, we've never been an emergency relief type of organization. We were a learning center, we were a community center. But as the pandemic hit and we started making calls to our program participants, we learned very quickly what the need was and how they were suffering from gathering essentials like food or other essential items like diapers, like you can see here. Um, so we were incredibly fortunate to have so many of you tonight, and others that might not be joining tonight, and organizations that really rally around and supported the work that we do and supported our B1C pantry initially with donations, but also with your volunteer times. We had volunteers that made all the way journeys to upstate New York to try to gather food that we were not able to secure here in Stanford. But volunteers were also critical in bringing in food to those homebound because of the COVID. So we're incredibly fortunate to count with so many fantastic volunteers and partners. We also were able to secure PPE products like this mask here. Organizations and corporations like Bank of America donated over 3,000 masks that we have been distributing to our community. Every day at B1C, about 30 families come to receive. When we phase out actually the B1C pantry, we increase the amount of donation in gift cards for supermarket. So about 30 families come every day to receive those gift cards and masks as well. And oftentimes we've been providing support since the beginning for rental relief as well. I was saying a bit ago that the Latinx community and the Black community as well were hit super hard during the pandemic. We learned very quickly that COVID was not the grand equalizer we were talking about at the beginning, but the Latinx population in particular were the number one getting in positive cases. For Stanford, about 47% of positive cases have been actually Latinx, male in greater numbers than female, and the reality was that they were the ones that were getting tested the least. So we've been partnering with the city of Stanford, with community health centers and Optimus to run a number of pop-up COVID testing sites at different churches and places and parks and so on. And this one is actually outside of B1C. We were also part from the very beginning with the census to make sure that the hard to count populations were not left out in the census. The pandemic really hit those initial plans, but we went ahead and we've been running every day or once a week actually. Census field reps would come to B1C and would support those families that would come to receive support and help them to fill in the census forms as well. Prior to the pandemic as well, and as many of you know, we had our homework lab on site. So afternoons were live places at B1C where many of our children's our parents and families' children that could not get the support at home either because of the educational level of parents or because of language issues would receive support at B1C. And as the pandemic hit and we moved remotely, and the schools moved remotely, so did we. We've been running in the spring and now again in the fall what we call a remote homework lab. This program in particular was very instrumental, not only to support the kids that were not coming to our center anymore, but it was also a way for them to speak English outside their houses. But it was also a way for B1C to be the liaison between these families who were having issues of first not having the devices, not having computers at home, or not having hotspot, the internet connectivity. So we were their voices with the Stanford Public Schools and trying to secure all the needs that they were suffering back then. back then, and some of them still today. Bringing a computer or a Chromebook to their houses doesn't mean that the problem is solved. Many of them, it was the first time for many of these parents to use one of these Chromebooks. So issues have been coming our way, on a daily basis for the Homework Lab. The other program that we have under this Empower pillar is a parent organizing program. And you see them, many of these, what we call the Power Parents, organizing at the Boards of Education in February of this year. And we also moved these programs to an online platform. And this is one example where you have about 49 parents participating in this call with the Stanford Public Schools superintendent. So the work hasn't really stopped. And the last program that we have under Empower is our Immigration Legal Services. And you see here the director of that program in a consultation with one of the clients. And the last pillar is actually Engage. And for us, Engage, I was saying at the beginning how instrumental it is for us to make sure that we are all building really one community. And we had events like these family nights in which the larger community and our immigrant community would enjoy a meal together and a dance and so on. So it was a moment for them to participate. We haven't been able to come back to these events. Sometimes we would have over 120 people in our room. We were also holding events with corporations. And in this example, you have the Indeed staff playing games with our day workers on a Sunday afternoon. And also other events like town halls that we have put on hold. And I would like to end with this slide. And for me, it kind of represents what Engage means at very different levels. She's one of our skills development program participants. I graduated from the culinary program. And she showed up when we were having our B1C pantry with a number of bags from a supermarket to donate to the food pantry. And when I was thanking her and wanted her to extend our thanks to the supermarket owner, she said, and I recall her words, "I am not rich, but I'm here to support the other members in the community the way you supported me." So I just wanted to leave us with this slide, as I find very, very telling. So this is my bit of the presentation. And Roberto, I wanted now to introduce you because it is really my great pleasure. And I don't know if you can please show yourself on the screen. Here you are again. So again, thank you. I was saying that it is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Roberto Gonzalez, Harvard School of Education professor and award-winner author of Lives in Limbo, Undocumented and Coming of Age in America. Dr. Gonzalez is the director of the newly formed Immigration Initiative at Harvard. His research centers on contemporary processes of immigration and social inequality, and it stems from theoretical interest at the intersection of race and ethnicity, immigration and policy. And I just wanted to say a quick thanks to Sara Rendon, who was the person, one of your students who actually connected us to you. So just a quick thank you there. Dr. Gonzalez's presentation will last about 20 minutes and we will take some questions. We will be wrapping up today's events around 8:15. So welcome, Roberto. The screen is all yours.
Thank you very much, Anka, for the very, very kind introduction. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you to your whole team at B1C. Thank you also to those tuning in tonight. It's we know that that there are many competing things for us nowadays, especially now that we're all at home. Our kids, our work, all of this blending together, and so it's really nice. It's nice to be here, and it's nice that people could take part. I want to share my slides right now, and I want to talk a little bit about kind of my trajectory of learning over the last 28 years. So I'm really pleased to be in this space. I give a lot of academic talks, and so I'm pleased to be at a community organization, and I really wish we could all be in person and enjoying each other's company. But I'm grateful to be here tonight. So I want to talk a little bit about my life's work over the last 28 years, which has been squarely around supporting young people from immigrant families, and in specifically those young people from mixed status families, or families where households where family members have a mix of status, maybe undocumented immigrants, maybe green card holders, American born citizen children, maybe TPS holders, maybe DACA beneficiaries. But first I want to put up again the mission of B1C, and I think that this is very relevant. B1C's mission is building one community's mission is to advance the successful integration of immigrants and their families. So I'm a sociologist by training, and sociologists and social scientists more broadly have spent generations trying to understand the processes by which immigrants and their children become integrated into the fabric of our country. Increasingly so today, it's immigration policy that's been a driving force in these questions of integration. Um, so I put that up because I wanted to kind of tie in my own personal story with what the wonderful description that Anka has just given about such a great, wonderful organization. And so I say 28 years. So I've been doing this work since early 1990s, and so I count 10 years between college and graduate school I spent as a youth worker in Chicago, and then the last 18 years, my trajectory over the last 18 years as a researcher, as a scholar, as a professor. But I started in Chicago, early 1990s. I graduated from college in 1992. And if people remember, 1992 was a time a lot like today. Massive demographic change was taking root in communities across the country, and we see some civil unrest, some racial tension in communities around the country. And for me, as a graduating senior, um, I was really ready to be done with school and ready to kind of have my hands in the ground, my feet on the ground in community. And so after college, I moved to Chicago, where I'd spent a semester as a student my junior year. And I ended up getting a job where I had interned while in college at a community center. I moved into the neighborhood, and so I lived literally down the alley from where I worked. 2 years later, I got a job as a director of youth programs, and I moved my job 4 blocks away. But for 10 years, I lived and worked in this community, living and working alongside of immigrant children and their families. And this gave me a real worm's eye view of the ways in which kind of larger issues like immigration, like schooling, politics, how they were playing out in people's everyday worlds. This community was an immigrant community, a port of entry community for immigrants from Mexico, from Puerto Rico, from the Dominican Republic, and from Poland. And here I am, young 20-something-year-old, trying to kind of get a grasp of this community and the work that I was doing. Um, Again, over the years, it became very apparent to me the ways in which immigration status was playing out for our kids and their families. Kids, again, from mixed status families who were encountering barriers because of their parents' undocumented status, many parents afraid to interact with the school system, a lot of times intimidated to interact with a lot of institutions within our community. and a small but growing demographic of young people, of children who were born outside of the United States, had come, had immigrated to communities like ours, but lacked legal status. And it became really apparent to me, especially over the years as we watched these kids grow up, kids who had been integrated into our neighborhood, into the public school system from really from day one, had grown up alongside of American born friends and peers, but at a really critical time in their lives as their friends were moving forward, getting driver's licenses, taking after school jobs, thinking about college, receiving financial aid for college, that these young people were hitting dead ends because of their undocumented status. And for many of them, this was their first time in their lives that they had encountered these barriers. So fast forward a few years, and I'm in a graduate program in Southern California, and I'm doing what was most comfortable, most familiar with me for me, spending time in local community organizations in Southern California. And I start meeting young people with very similar stories. Had come to the US at 6 months old, a year old, 2 years old, 5 years old. Again, had grown up alongside of American born friends and peers, but at a really critical time in their lives as their friends were kind of experiencing kind of a growing independence, and moving through important American rites of passage, doors were being slammed to these young people. And so that became my professional work, my academic work. I had this issue, this experience, and these problems of practice. And I realized that from the point of view of a scholar, I really wanted to understand more deeply what was happening in their lives. What were some of the forces that were playing out in their young lives? So to put some context here, there are more than 2.5 million undocumented immigrants who've been in this country since childhood. So while oftentimes the public debate paints this population in very broad brushstrokes, it's a lot more diverse, a lot more nuanced than the kind of the dominant narrative paints it as. And in fact, more than 16.5 million people live in mixed status families, and among them, 5.5 to 6 million children, American born children, have at least one undocumented parent. So to think more about the scale of this population, 98,000 young people, undocumented young people, graduate from high schools every year. And that's out of a larger cohort of about 120,000 who reach high school graduation age a year. A very small fraction of these students, they matriculate to higher education. They're excluded from federal financial aid, and many of them see higher education as a revolving door that doesn't lead to graduation. So in my book, Lives in Limbo, I chronicle the difficult transitions that these young people make. This discovery period that I described, that a young man that I talked to said it was like waking up to a nightmare. So this kind of the hitting dead ends, running into walls, doors being closed, this succession of blocked opportunities, from driving, from obtaining lawful employment, again to financial aid for college, to voting. Many of the milestones for young people are shut off. Adolescent to the kind of adolescent and young adult milestones. We know by now the circumstances, and many of us know the stories of many of these young people that we call dreamers. But what is less discussed is as these young people are coming into greater awareness of their opportunities or closed opportunities, they're also coming to greater awareness of their identities of as undocumented immigrants and what that means in today's society. And so many of them face stigma, and many of them respond to stigma by keeping secrets. And this closes off a lot of opportunities, closes off friendship groups, peer networks, relationships with adults. And for many of these young people, over time, these experiences manifest in these physical and emotional manifestations of stress. By now I've met thousands of these young people across the country, and they've all had this very similar story. They've described these physical and emotional manifestations of stress: trouble sleeping, chronic headaches, ulcers, problems getting out of bed in the morning, sleep troubles, eating disorders, what they were calling depression, thoughts of suicide, attempted suicide. So it became very clear to me this very strong link between undocumented status and strained well-being. My book, Lives in Limbo, I refer to this as a master status, meaning that this undocumented status for many young people overwhelms all other things. So regardless of their English language fluency, their educational attainment, for many of these young people, at some point in their lives, they hit dead ends. So we know, though, that things took a dramatic turn for the better in 2012 when US President Barack Obama implemented the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, or DACA. And DACA for eligible young people, and more than 840,000 young people have taken advantage of this program, provided them access to deportation relief, renewable Social Security numbers, or renewable work permits, so work authorization, driver's licenses. So in the very short term, DACA has dramatically expanded access for young people. 2013, my team and I carried out a national survey of 2,700 young people, and we found that young people were taking giant steps towards the American mainstream. They were obtaining new jobs, increasing their earnings, starting to build credit through opening up bank accounts, credit cards. They were obtaining new forms of health care. This policy, this program, the significance of it cannot be underscored enough. Right? It is inarguably the most successful immigrant integration policy that we've seen over the last 3 decades. Nevertheless, as an administrative action, DACA's reach has been limited. So it doesn't provide a pathway to legalization, doesn't address exclusions for financial aid. It still leaves these young people in a limbo. And how do we think of a program that targets a small segment of a much larger community in need? So while young people are really soaring in some very significant ways, they're also very meaningfully tied to parents and other family members who are still in need and are without relief. And so this has created a lot of strain where many young people, DACA beneficiaries, continue to worry about their parents. So September 5th of 2017, many of us know by now, Attorney General Jeff Sessions announced the end of DACA. And we fast forward to this past summer. This case has been tied up in the courts. The US Supreme Court ruled this past summer that the determination was unlawful. And so we still have somewhere in the neighborhood of 650,000 young people who still have DACA. Unfortunately, since 2017, the administration has not accepted new applications. So what that means is that tens of thousands of young people are aging into eligibility, right? Aging into the time when they're able to apply, but they haven't been able to. Remember that the figure that I gave of 120,000 young people a year reach high school graduation age around 17, 18 years old. And so there's a growing pipeline of young people who've grown up under kind of the DACA reality, but have not been able to obtain the same sort of benefits that many of their older siblings, cousins, neighbors have. And so that's been very significant development. So this takes us to our current moment. And for all of us, this current pandemic has been a strain. It's been a financial strain. It has been emotionally taxing, has been tough on our mental health, as we're not able to, many of us are not able to resume many of our familiar patterns, to see family members, to see our friends, to engage in the activities that we were prior to March. We know, though, that while we're all in the same boat, many of us we're in different boats. And so immigrants have been disproportionately affected by this COVID crisis, while many immigrants have been performing essential work. Many immigrant households, mixed status families, have not been eligible for the relief that's been provided. And we see families are asking a lot more of their older children. So we also know that recent rulings on temporary protected status could possibly expand vulnerability in the very near future. So very, very quickly, for many young people, many of our young people in our communities are facing, again, stress about their families. They're taking on extra share of responsibilities at home. Their lives are marked, are punctuated by ever-growing fear, anxiety, and stress that's very palpable. Many of them today are coping with uncertain futures. And many of these DACA beneficiaries, not knowing what's going to happen to the program, are living with the idea that they may be under an expiration date, right? Having to navigate adolescence and adulthood without DACA. So I want to think about how we support young people. And I put up many challenges, and I know that within this audience, many of you are experts on really kind of, because of your work with immigrant youth and their families. So we know about the multi-layered challenges, but this is not a kind of one issue, one dimensional issue. And so these challenges are multi-layered. And so how do we understand the increasing number of young people who don't have DACA? DACA has gotten a lot of attention. It's been very successful, but the vast majority of young people in our communities don't have DACA. And so how do we understand the needs and tailor services for young people? Part of the answer to that is to understand very critically, and I think probably this group more than others knows this very well, is the fate of young people. Their fates are tied very strongly to their families. And so any services, any efforts that are tailored to children, to teenagers, to young adults, we really have to expand support to the entire family. And that's why I'm in such big support of the work of B1C. Really kind of all of these things that I can think of is really the work that B1C is doing right now. And so thinking of community-based organizations, thinking about the staff, frontline, those on the front lines right now as essential, right, to immigrant families, essential to our communities, to our country right now. Think about expanding legal assistance to families. Families are really in need right now. Workforce development opportunities for young people and for their parents, for their relatives, expanding mental health services and wellness more generally, school and community engagement, and also community referrals. My wife teases me that I talk very slowly and I tend to talk a lot. So I really appreciate your patience. I'm glad that we've got a Q&A period. So I will end right now, but I'm looking forward to engaging your questions, and I will stop the share right now.
Thank you, Roberto. I don't think you speak too slow. I think it was great. It's always a pleasure um, to hear you, and it's incredibly enlightening to listening to your research journey. So before we open the floor for everyone to ask some questions, I have one that I've been wanting to ask. A large number of Guatemalans and Central Americans live in Stanford and they participate in B1C programs. Many of them, youth included, have fled violence and poverty in their countries. Can you share any observations on the similarities and or differences between the challenges faced by Guatemalans and Central Americans in the east of this country versus the west or some other parts where you have conducted research?
Yeah, Anka, thank you very much for the question. It's a really great question. I think that oftentimes the discussion of immigrants today harkens back to a time that was very different. Turn of the 20th century, and immigrants who were able to come to this country under more or less uniform circumstances were able to be absorbed into kind of our mainstream institutions. Today, those processes look really different, and there's not a uniform starting line. And so when you talk about kind of different groups within the community, I mentioned earlier that oftentimes our political discussion paints immigrants in very broad brushstrokes. But what we need to understand is that young people, families, um, are coming from the context of exit from their home countries is dramatically different across countries, and the context of reception, how they're received in this country, varies greatly. So, for example, while some immigrants today may immigrate to this country with advanced degrees, with money in the bank, um, may bypass immigrant communities and have professional jobs once they land in places like JFK, LAX. Others come from fleeing violence with minimal levels of education, some without legal status, and some confront a very hostile context of reception once they get here. And so we see that there's not kind of a uniform starting line, that some people may start ahead of a so-called starting line, while some families may start way far behind. And so the process of integration looks really different for many communities. And for Central Americans, we have to think about those multi-layers, um, the multi-layered challenges that they face. Um, um, Fleeing violence. Also, for some, Spanish might not be their first language. Many speak indigenous languages, and so how do we cater services to these populations? Also, now more so than ever, where one lives shapes one's opportunities or barriers, and that is you think about so I live in Boston. Boston has reliable public transportation, has an affordable public education system, has a dense network of immigrant serving organizations. But some immigrants land in kind of more rural areas where they don't have access to good public transportation, where they might not have services in their communities in their own languages. And so really today we think about immigrants, we need to understand kind of these important contexts, where they're coming from, who they are, and where they land. These all play really important factors in determining how well they're integrated or not.
This is something, Roberto, that we actually see often in our ELL classes, particularly the basic level. Sometimes we have people that are coming from Colombia and Venezuela with master's degrees, like you said, but speak zero English. And they are next to a Guatemalan person whose native language is, again, a Mayan dialect without a written system. And they are learning there, but you see the integration and the progression completely different. And they are taking classes at the same at the same level to start with.
Yeah, that's right. And I think many people here tonight, and those people really, as I said, the really essential workers, right? Those people on the front lines and communities understand these differences, understand these nuances. But unfortunately, immigrants get painted in such broad brushstrokes that we tend to say, well, I know this guy, he was able to get ahead and do really well. He already has a job at a bank, et cetera, et cetera. Why can't you?
Yeah,
But these differences really shape opportunities and barriers.
completely agree. I have some questions already from the audience, so I'm going to go and ask. Um, I'm going to read one to you. Assuming that a new administration comes into office and seeing the damage that executive orders unpacking the immigrant courts and boards of immigration appeals, how long will it take the new administration to revert all the policies that now make it more difficult to apply for a green card and petition family from abroad? Revert public charge rule, for example, or if the new administration comes in, how long before any legislation to offer permanent solutions to TPS or DACA applicants could come about?
Yeah, this is a really good question. I think that the last 4 years, this administration has really centered immigration within its policy agenda. And um, this was no surprise, as we really, as candidate Trump really campaigned on a kind of heavy immigration platform. So we've seen. I'm talking about tonight. I'm discussing the circumstances of undocumented young people in mixed status families, but we've seen everything from the travel bans to public charge rule, to a kind of shrinking of our reversal of our refugee policy, kind of undoing of temporary protected status. So really on all fronts. And so you look at a kind of the broad immigrant community, and there are multiple people affected. How long will this take? I think that the with some of these executive orders, we've seen that they're a little more easy to kind of to implement and to kind of dismantle, but it won't. This will not be easy, and this will not be overnight. I think that this also really depends on the will of the next administration. It's a Trump administration or it's a Biden-Harris administration. And what I want to say about that is, and I'm not a politics, I'm not a scholar of politics. I understand the very difficult dance between policy and politics, but also understand that for most politicians, it's organizing. It's really going to take organizing. It's going to take grassroots efforts on the part of the community. And what we've learned over the last 4 years is that while some of these policies have had a profound chilling effect, I mentioned kind of strained mental health, they've also had a galvanizing effect within communities. And that is that what we're seeing is that the immigrant community, or immigrant communities plural, have really become more active, right? Conventional wisdom may be that they really retreat. This chilling effect has them kind of divorcing themselves from kind of mainstream public life. But to the contrary, they've been very active, and this I think is what change will require. is a real kind of active push on the amount of on the part of immigrant communities and their allies.
I agree with you. And I have a question here that I will um, kind of tie to the other one. Jill Patricia is asking, what are the options or path for immigrants in this present limbo? What would be the ideal way to get legalization in a perfect quote unquote world?
Yeah, the legalization question is an important one, and I think that, you know, at some point um, the conversation had veered away from citizenship, and I think that I think that we should still be pushing for citizenship, because I think that anything less than citizenship is a quasi legal status that that can be revoked, and so I think that we should be pushing for citizenship. When that's going to happen, before the 2016 election, projections were as far out as 2024 for immigration reform. I don't know how these last 4 years have changed the political calculus, but again, I think that it will really require an organized effort on the part of communities. Um, um, you know, we know, I think, where President Trump stands on these issues. I think that the Joe Biden has said that he wants to make this a priority. I think that he has campaigned on kind of the success of DACA, but to be clear, we need much more than DACA. We need much more than even a DREAM Act. And as I said before, the fates of young people are tied to what happens to their parents, to their other family members. And so legalization for a broad section of the immigrant community. Look, this is a population of long-term stayers. And we look at a population of 11 million or so, and the vast majority, more than 75%, has been here for more than 15 years. So the population of stayers who've grown roots, who've made connections, who are tied fundamentally to neighbors, to employers, to employees, in some respects, to communities of faith, that are very, very intimately woven into the fabric of our communities. And so I think that, you know, I think that this is not going to be easy, but it hasn't been easy over the last several administrations. But I think that we're closer than we are than ever. We're closer than ever. And so you know, I think that it's going to take a major push. We won't be able to rest on laurels.
I agree with you. And the push comes from all. And I think education, educating us as a community, it's important. There is one question here that talks about what are ways that teachers in schools with undocumented students can get trained to understand these students' experiences. B1C has done important teacher training work in Fairfield County. We have done so and will continue to do so. But how would you answer this question?
Yeah, I think services like these are critically important. I think also it's really important to enlist the help of young people, to enlist the help of young people in the community, who walked in those shoes, who can relate to um, young people in K through 12 schools, who speak their language, who they can relate to, who can say, you know, look, this may be a difficult pathway, but here's what I did, and this is how I did it, to potentially establish big sister, big brother programs, so that these younger immigrant students have role models who can help them, who can illuminate a pathway. A big problem with many young people from mixed status and families and who are undocumented is this stigma. And so not being able to share, not being able to talk about this. A lot of times when it's how kids get help, being able to disclose, look, I'm having problems, and having trusted relationships with teachers, with counselors, and other important adults, or at least kind of big sisters or big brothers within their community that they can seek out for advice. And I think that we need to continue, and we need to multiply these efforts, and we need to, I think, really importantly, think outside the box and really find young people who are role models. And I don't just mean young people who've been straight A students who are class presidents, this model, quote unquote, dreamer, but to show the younger kids in our community different pathways, and young people who've taken diverse pathways, but have been able to find um, meaningful lives, have been able to carve out meaningful lives and pursuits um, that are not tied to their status, and that allow them to feel good about themselves and to contribute to their families, to their community, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. In that note, I want to read one question here, Roberto. It's a DACA recipient who's asking this question, and says, Claudia says, as a DACA recipient myself, I have seen and experienced the planting of seeds of fear that opportunities are not available due to our status. Yet, when I took a leap of faith and applied to a private college and later to a large company, I was taken in with open arms. How can we spread this information so that more DACA recipients take the leap and at least apply?
Yeah, and I think that Claudia, it's a wonderful question, and I really appreciate your question, and I wish we had the opportunity to talk afterwards. I'm inspired by your story. I think it goes back, Anka, to your question that you asked, and that's about educators. It's about educators. It's about youth workers. It's about those in the community um, becoming aware of these stories and spreading these stories, and really kind of helping to sow these seeds. Because so oftentimes when I give talks to communities and in schools, number one question asked by educators is, look, I've got undocumented students in my class. I know them really well. I don't want to build up their hope, because I know what awaits them. And I feel very conflicted, and I feel it's unethical for me to build up their hope, only to know that what potentially awaits them later. And what many young people themselves have said in response to this question is, if you're moving forward, it's something it's positive. It's a positive boost to your mental health, to be in school, to be doing something productive. Education, and this is a mantra within immigrant communities. Education is something that nobody can take away from you, right? And number three is that where do you want to be? Where do you want to be if once legalization is passed in this country, to be prepared and ready, right, to take on the opportunities that await you, or to have to catch up, or not to be eligible by that point. This is an important lesson that many young people learned with DACA, is that those who were ready, those who were in community college, who were toughing it out in community college, or found scholarships to four-year universities, were poised and ready once they got their work authorization, once with work permit in hand, with driver's license in their wallet, were ready and really launched themselves. And so, I know that it's a tough issue for many educators, and many people feel really torn and not wanting to build up hope. But at a time like this, it is important that we do, right? We do invest hope in the younger generation, and work hard and collectively to make those dreams a reality for young people.
I agree with you. I want to tie it to this question from Sandra Ferreira. She is up in Danbury with Danbury Works, another nonprofit organization. And she's asking, what would be one strategy to implement within community organizations to support youth?
Yeah, so I think, as somebody who when I left Chicago, my youth programs supported about, I think, somewhere close to about 300 young people, and we had ELL, kind of ELL segment of young people. We had very high achievers, National Honor Society. We had young people who had dropped out of school, young people who had some gang involvement. And so my long-winded response, as you see, all my responses are long-winded, but my long-winded response to this is that there's not kind of one pathway for our students, and we can't have kind of one program that's a catch-all for the needs of all young people. But what we do need to do is to invest in young people. And I think that, oftentimes the schools make these designations of kind of deserving and undeserving, and a lot of kids get pushed out of our schools. And the one advantage community-based organizations have over schools is that we're able to see people in their wholeness, right? Is the work that you do, you really see people in their wholeness, and you're able to um, uh, uh, give the same amount of your hearts and your efforts to young people who maybe see average students, or maybe who've left school because of various reasons, as you are to those who are straight A, um, 4.0 GPA students. Um, so the investment is critically important, and I think that what an important part of that investment is really in really um, recruiting young people to be part of those efforts, to be part of the solution, um, to see young people in all their fullness, as people with agency and self-determination, and who are really at the center of the efforts of your efforts to support them.
I agree completely with that. And we see, I love when you said before, communities in plural, because that diversity, we tend to bring people into monolithic and kind of unified all the immigrant community as one, or all the youth as one, and that's certainly not the case. I'm going to change a little bit the subject, and I'm reading a number of questions coming in. And as I mentioned before in your bio, you've been working in the intersection between race, ethnicity, and immigration. And this question here, in the past year, we have all seen the increasing focus on an outrage about racism against Black people in the United States. The largest immigrant group in Connecticut is actually Jamaican. And of course, our immigrant communities cover the spectrum from very light skin to brown and Black from all continents. Can you share your thoughts about how race and immigration intersect and possibly exacerbate each other in the United States?
Yeah, I think this is the $64,000 question right now in immigrant communities. We've seen the organizing that's gone on, and I think that many of us have also been witness to or have participated in some of these conversations, these discussions. That I think that there's a lot of soul searching right now, because to be very honest, this is a race today plays a central role in kind of how people are treated in our society. And there are two grand narratives, I think, that the two grand narratives of this country is that it's a country that was built by immigrants, and the kind of long legacy of slavery and racism. But these are oftentimes very separate conversations. But they're, when you think about kind of a long history of exclusion in this country based on race, from Chinese exclusions to, we see in the American Southwest these signs in restaurants: no dogs, no Mexicans allowed. We see lynchings. We've seen segregated schools in the period of segregation that have become now de facto segregated. Race plays a very central role in this country, and it's not a coincidence that it's also playing out within immigrant communities. And many immigrant communities today are having very hard conversation hard conversations about the role that race plays. And I said earlier about this starting line is that we're coming at these issues from different stages and from obviously from different points of view. But while I said that undocumented status may be a master status, one of my graduate students came up with this really, I think, really brilliant way to think about this. Race now also plays an amplifying status. So maybe you might be an immigrant, a Black immigrant from the Caribbean, um, um, from African countries, and you might also have undocumented status. You may be pulled over by the police because of the color of your skin, right? And that may have an amplifying status in that interaction, and that may then land you into a deportation proceeding because of your undocumented status. I think that we really, I think that our communities really kind of need to be reckoning with these questions. I think that we are reckoning with these very difficult questions, but we need to understand, as I mentioned before, with this COVID situation, where we're all in the same boat, but many of us are maybe we're all in the same kind of tide, but many of us are in different boats, navigating this really differently. And I think that race is one very critical axis um, uh, of access, of barriers, um, of of integration within communities.
And we see constantly that, when Black immigrants come into this country, they receive one single identity, the identity of a Black person in the United States, that, as you said, they get pulled over and go into jail. That's the case for many African Americans, for many Black immigrants. It goes from getting pulled over to being deported back home. So the consequences are really dire for our Black and Brown communities. I'm going to be very mindful of our times. We have a number of questions that we're not going to get to tonight. I might send them to you if you don't mind, and you answer then at your leisure if you've got the time.
I can also put my email in the chat. I had it up on the screen, but I can put it. I welcome people to.
I'm going to ask one last one. While you're doing that, is as of January 2020, more than 5,000 immigrants in Fairfield County were in deportation proceedings in immigration court, putting this county in the top 50 of all over 3,000 counties in the United States for immigrants facing possible deportation. Can you recommend ways in which B1C can educate a broader immigrant community, both documented and undocumented, about deportation to help them deal with the fear that they or a family member could be targeted for deportation? This question comes from Ann Downey, our board chair.
Yeah, deportation is really the issue of our time in immigrant communities across the country. And I've mentioned the kind of chilling effect that this has had. And this is not something that's been owned by the current presidential administration. This has continuity, Republicans and Democrats alike. Over the last several presidential administrations, we've seen a kind of a gradual, a steady ramping up. And what this has meant is that this has really instilled fear and anxiety in immigrant communities, such that many people are aware that a walk in the park, waiting at the bus stop, even sitting on one's porch can land one in arrest, detention, and deportation. So the fear of deportation, right? And it's not even deportation per se, but the fear of it really, for many people, narrowly circumscribes everyday routines. And so this is something that's gripping everybody, and I think that it's really important for for organizations to own this as an issue, to offer know your rights trainings to communities. They've got these great cards in multiple language that people can carry for their rights. To one thing that schools in I'm in Cambridge and nearby Somerville, schools started doing is having parents revising the pickup card, so that expanding names on the pickup card, so that if a parent or parents are picked up, that there are other people who can pick up kids from school. Having emergency response plans um, ready for families is really important. Having access to legal assistance, to readily available legal assistance, emergency assistance for families. All of this is really critical. But it's also very important that it's an issue that's owned by the entire community. That it's not just an issue for those undocumented members in our community, but it's everybody, and it's everybody working together to support each other and to support the most vulnerable members of the community. And through that, really pulling resources, pulling knowledge, and sharing community assets to establish these kinds of funds, pro bono, mental health services, legal support, strengthening relationships between community-based organizations and schools. It really takes it's an issue that really requires the entire village.
I agree with you, Roberto. We're on the top of the hour, and I could speak with you all night, and I know that we have lots of questions that could be answered all night, but I wanted to say thank you again for such an inspiring conversation. And I know that tons of virtual applauses go to you tonight. This has been a very engaging and thought-provoking evening with you. And thank you to our audience for the numerous and incredible solid questions. They only reinforce, I think, once again, how much we care about immigrant and immigrant integration issues in our area. And you were talking about that this is the work not only for the undocumented, but for everyone. And I think our work together with our volunteers, with our supporters, to build one community thrives because of the meaningful partnerships that B1C creates, not only between organizations, but also with individual community members. So thank you everyone here tonight for being part of this effort. And I just wanted to share a couple of slides. So if you can help me put those slides out there. I just wanted to say that if you're looking for ways to support our work, there are several ways that you can do that. B1C is funded, as many of you know, primarily through individual donations and foundation grants and community support, and your donations are always welcome. I also wanted to say that we couldn't do what we do without the support of over 400 active volunteers that we have every year who contribute their time, passion, and skills to our mission. Remote volunteer opportunities are available right now, so please join us. And lastly, you can always follow us on social media and subscribe to our email newsletters to stay up to date on B1C's work and other upcoming webinars. You can find all these and you have it here on our website. So thank you again, Roberto, for a wonderful conversation. Also, our two wonderful event committees chairs, Sarita Hanley, who you saw at the beginning in the video, and Arisleida, who's joining us right now, Arisleida Real, who will provide the closing remarks. And thank you everyone for joining us tonight. We love having you all with us. Please stay safe and well. And Arisleida, the screen is all yours.
Thank you, Anka, and thank you, Dr. Gonzalez. What a wonderful presentation. And yes, I am lucky to have this part of the presentation in which I am the last person and I get to say goodnight to you. And I know very well that I'm standing between you and watching the debate or turning that Netflix show or getting that other glass of wine. So I'll be very, very, very brave. And what I wanted to do is because unfortunately we can't roll, this is not a film, so we can't roll the credits. So I wanted to say thank you. I wanted to say thank you to you. You had been with us for the last hour. You have taken the time out of your busy days to be with us, so that's important to us, and we appreciate that. This is an annual event. What we did today, this is our annual cocktail reception that we always have done at the Stanford Yacht Club. And this year, we brought it to you on a virtual format. And so there was a lot of logistics to get this done live to you. And I thought I'd like to take a moment to say thank you to the staff of B1C. Thank you to Melanie Hernandez, Pia Roser, Krista Chu, uh, Suzanne Wind. I have a lot of people to thank, and they were volunteering their time. They took the time to get this on for us live, and I'm appreciating that. My committee and my co-chair, Sarita Hanley, who you met at the beginning of the presentation. Thank you. Thank you to the ladies in that committee. And they were with us to make this happen for you. Angeles Dam, I know you're looking, you're watching us, so thank you for being there. Marianne Khan, Maria Sandoval, and Ann Downey, who is our president of the board of directors. Thank you, Ann, for your leadership and to be here with us. To my fellow board members, thank you. I know you're watching. I know you're supporting us, and thank you for being there. And with that, I also want to make sure that I get to ask you a little bit of something as well. And my ask to you is that you reach into your heart and you collect all the kindness that I know is there, and you take action. Step out, join us in our mission. We are changing lives. We are making real impact on our people in our community. I'm an immigrant as well, and I know you understand the cost. So please join us. There's so many ways, and I look forward to meeting you soon in person. Good night.